Hey friends, it's Sarah and I'm back from vacation. A few weeks ago, I made a vacation TBR video, and today I wanted to fill you in on what books I actually ended up reading while on my trip. So I read 5.5 books on vacation and finished that last book when I got home. So I will be talking about all 6 of those books, even though one of them was like half read while at home, but half of it was on vacation, so we're going to count it. 6 books for this video. So first up is Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. This one ended up being 4 stars for me, and this is an arc that I was given, so thank you to Tor Publishing for that. This is V. Schwab's newest book. It's coming out on June 10th, so keep your eyes out for that. I mentioned this book in my most anticipated of 2025 video, but at that time I didn't really know what it was about beyond like toxic lesbian vampires, I think was the only plot that had been disclosed. But this is actually a fantasy novel that spans centuries and focuses on 3 women who become vampires. So the first one is Maria, who lives in the 1520s, and she marries a powerful man in hopes of gaining her own freedom and power. I'm going to read you a little quote. This is not from the published version, so there may be some edits, but it says, "And as if her mother could feel her stiffening, she leaned close and said, 'You will learn, it is better to bend than to break.' Maria stared into the hearth. 'Why should I be the one who bends?' Air hissed through her mother's teeth. 'I know you, daughter. I know you have always wanted more, and you have chosen a grand life, but it will not be an easy one. Men, like the Viscount, they take what they want.' 'So do I,' thought Maria, as the comb hissed through her hair like water on hot coals." The second woman is Alice, and she is living in 2019. She's a new college student. She's anxious, she's alone, and she's really searching for connection and a new way to be herself. Alice shrinks, is swallowed, disappears. No, disappearing would be better, because maybe in the absence of Alice, she could become someone else. One of the feral girls who have been planted and watered in their bodies, who have pruned their looks or let them grow wild, the same girls who turn their full brows into a wolfish power, their painted lips into a weapon. I'm not going to tell you about the third vampire because she comes in just a little over halfway through this book. She's from the 1820s, a time of balls and like the ton, but I'm not going to say any more than that because it's kind of spoilers. But also everyone in this is gay, which is great. They're all sapphic, they're all kissing women, so it's lovely. But Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil explores power and freedom, what it means to be human and what it means to be a monster. And V.E. Schwab really dives into the predator and prey dynamic, especially in relation to gender norms. But throughout all of those themes, really at its core, it's about hunger for power, for freedom, and they're vampires, so for blood. Similar to Addie LaRue, this is more of a character study with like very lyrical writing than a super plot-heavy book. It's also pretty chunky. It's nearly 600 pages, but I think the pacing in this was like fairly good, fairly consistent. My only gripe was really that the ending wrapped up maybe a little too quickly. It was still very satisfying, but I think it could have been like spread out a little bit more. And I did rate this 4 stars, like I said. I think the thing that is keeping it from being 5 stars for me was just that I don't always fully click with V.E. Schwab's writing style. It's the same thing with like Addie LaRue. I felt the same way. I really enjoyed it, but it just never really like stuck with me as a favorite. It's still an excellent book, but it's just not, I don't think either of them are ones that like I think about a lot or that have like really become part of me. Like they're not like core books, you know? They're still really good. I think if you liked Addie LaRue, you will love this. If you're a fan of vampire books, I think this will be a big hit. The second book that I read on vacation is The Rescue by Nicholas Sparks. This one was also a 4-star read for me. This one has been sitting on my shelf for years and years, and I finally got around to reading it, and I really enjoyed it. It felt a lot like Safe Haven to me, which was great because I really enjoyed Safe Haven. So we're back in familiar and comfortable territory. But this follows Taylor, who is a volunteer firefighter with unresolved childhood trauma, especially revolving around his dad, and then Denise, who has a 5-year-old son who struggles with speaking and language. I like that the novel explores the emotional connection between Denise and Taylor more than their physical connection, which is something that I feel like a lot of more modern romance and like ones that I've read recently especially focus on like the physical connection over the emotional, and this is the opposite. Although I do feel like the chemistry maybe could have been like a little bit better. It's not bad, but it just kind of like, I feel like sometimes Nicholas Sparks are like, she's a girl and he's a guy, and like of course they're gonna fall in love. So, you know, like there needs to be a little bit more, I think. But it was still pretty good. I also really liked the relationships to Denise's son, like her and her son, as well as Taylor and the son, and there's a pretty good supporting cast as well. So, you know, the characters were pretty good, and that's something that is very important to me. Also in the author's note, Nicholas Sparks says that the son in this has pervasive development disorder, which is based on Nicholas Sparks's own experience with his son who had that same condition. So that kind of explains how real and raw that part of the story felt, and that was really well done. I thought that was very good. The like parental frustration with trying to, you know, have your kid have the best life and them not meeting their goals and their milestones and how hard that must be. I thought that was done really well. All right, the third book, Persuasion by Jane Austen. This one was 3 stars. I was the pretentious person sitting poolside reading Jane Austen. But you know what? I wanted to finally get through this one, and this was the push that I needed. This is a classic. It's Jane Austen's final novel published after her death, and it follows Anne Elliot, who was persuaded to break off an engagement to Captain Wentworth in hopes of making a better match. Now, several years later, she hasn't made a better match, and Wentworth has re-entered her life. She still kind of holds a candle for him and hopes that they can rekindle their connection. The second chance romance, it's The Blueprint. It was really good. I enjoyed it. I really loved the iconic, like, I am half agony, half hope line. I did want to see like a little bit more of like Wentworth and Anne interacting, because I felt like it was a lot of like Anne noticing that he was blushing or whatever and kind of inferring his feelings, like, oh, he does still care for me. And it's also written in 1816. So the language and like the plot is obviously quite different than a modern romance. And I think that was really what affected my enjoyment the most. I don't usually read a ton of classics, so it's a different type of reading, a different skill set. And like I wasn't expecting this to be like a modern romance or anything. Like that is not what I was hoping for from this. But yeah, it just, you know, it was good. I enjoyed it, but it was a classic written in old-timey language, and I feel like those ones I tend to struggle a little bit more with. Also, while on vacation, I did have to explain who Jane Austen was to an older man, which was not something I ever thought I would have to explain to someone. I was like, it's Jane Austen, and she's an icon, she's a legend, she's the first to ever do it. But I had to explain to him, and I was just like a little perplexed. Maybe this is just that XKCD meme, you know, where it's like, well, of course everyone knows these, but most normal people only know this thing. But regardless, that was just an interesting experience that I did not anticipate. All right, the next book I read was Next Year in Havana by Chanel Cleeton. This one, I think, is like 3.5 stars. It's a historical fiction about a Cuban-American woman traveling to Havana, Cuba, to spread her grandmother's ashes and kind of reconnect with her cultural roots. And there's a second timeline in this that follows her grandmother in 1958 when she was like a teenager falling in love during the Cuban Revolution. Honestly, this kind of felt like a non-fiction book that was told through the dialogue of fictional characters, but not necessarily in a bad way. Like the history part of this was really cool. It was very interesting. And I liked how the author presented the different opinions of the revolution and like the politics of Cuba. She had these different characters kind of acting as counterpoints. But in terms of story, a lot of the book felt really samey to me between the two timelines. They did kind of end in complementary ways. Like I think they were supposed to be sort of a mirror of each other, but they felt too similar right up till the end, especially in terms of the romance. So I don't think it really hit the way it was supposed to, because it just kind of felt like this is the exact same thing that happened to your grandmother, but not in an interesting way, in like a you couldn't be bothered to write a different character kind of way. I don't know. It just didn't hit the way it was supposed to. And I didn't really enjoy the romances as much. I was much more interested in like the politics and the ways that the different characters were dealing with all these like really big issues, and like what it means to be Cuban and to have stayed, and what it means to be Cuban but like have been displaced and have left, and you have this nostalgia for a place you've never been. In the case of Marisol, she had never been to Cuba, but her family has this like real nostalgia for the place. Meanwhile, when she comes back, like it's a very different place than had been talked about by her family, obviously, because it had been like 50 years since they'd been there. and then the people in Cuba being like, it's not that place anymore, and also we've been through a lot of stuff, and there's just like a lot of tension between the kind of cultural identities of these two groups of people, which is really interesting and really well done in this. A lot of the times when I read historical fiction that has like a modern timeline and then a historical timeline in it, I wish there was only the historical timeline, and this one's no different. I don't think the modern timeline added as much as I would have liked, and I think it would have been just better if it had been the 1958 timeline the whole way through. There were some interesting ideas, like I said, about like people who left during the revolution, people who stayed, and how they view Cuba, but I think there was a different way to do that because the modern day timeline just felt kind of like a whole lot of nothing, unfortunately. So that's why this one's 3.5 stars. It was okay. The history part was really interesting. The fiction part, I could kind of take or leave. All right, the penultimate book that I read on my vacation was One Golden Summer by Carley Fortune. This one actually ended up being 4 stars, and if you watch my TBR video, you'll know that I was like a little bit hesitant about this book because Carley Fortune has been a hit or miss author for me, and I wasn't sure about the character that we were going to follow, but I am happy to say I really enjoyed this one. It wasn't a 5-star read like her other ones that I've loved, but it was a solid 4, verging on like 4.5 stars. This was also an ARC, very kindly sent to me by the publisher, so thank you to them. But this comes out May 6th, so keep your eyes out for this one as well. And it follows Alice, who's kind of a burnt-out photographer, and Charlie, who is a brother from Every Summer After, Carley Fortune's first book. But in this, Alice is taking her nan back to a cottage in Barry's Bay, where she had spent a summer when she was 17, so that her nan can recover from surgery. But when they arrive at the cottage, Alice realizes that Charlie is one of the teens that she had photographed that summer when she was 17, and this photo was the one that changed her life and ignited her love of photography. Now he's kind of helping out the cottage. He lives nearby, and he's just being flirty and like a little bit of a playboy, and they start to connect as they go through the summer. As I said, when I started this book, I wasn't really sure if I would like Charlie due to his role in Every Summer After. If you know, you know. And his intro in this book was also kind of rough. Their first interaction is a phone call where he like answers a phone and is talking to people in the background, and there's all this noise and he's not really paying attention to the call. But then he like lectures her on her phone manners when she tries to kind of skip the how are yous and the pleasantries because he's obviously busy and she doesn't want to disturb him. She just like needs to know a couple things. So instead of saying, how are you? She's just like, hey, I'm doing this. And he's like super condescending and annoying. And he's just like, I'm like, this is how you talk to a stranger that you don't know at all. It was really bad, but thankfully he's not like that for the rest of the book. So I don't really know why they included that part. My theory is they're trying to capture that like enemies to lovers market, but it's not like that for the rest of the book. I would have just edited that out entirely. Because the rest of the book, he's like playful and he's charming and he draws Alice and her nan out of their shells. He's like, you know, playful and kind of like teasing Alice a little bit, but nowhere near as bad as that first phone call. That was really weird. But anyways, once they get to the cottage, Alice decides to have a more like stereotypical teen summer, and she writes this like bucket list of silly like teen things like jump off a rock, wear a skimpy bathing suit, yada yada yada, that she wants to accomplish during the summer to kind of get back a little bit of that summer cottage magic. And Charlie ends up helping her with that list. It's very fun. The chemistry is great between the characters. I like the setting again of Barry's Bay, very like nostalgic Ontario cottage country. And then Percy and Sam from Every Summer After make an appearance later in the book, which is also quite lovely. Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, it wasn't quite a 5-star, but I did really enjoy it. It was very good. Final book that I read, this is one that I half read on our like trip back home and then finished once we got home, was 17 by John Brownlow. This one was 2 stars. It's about an assassin. He's like super elite, and in order to attain his position, you have to kill the assassin who precedes you. But only in our main character's case, his predecessor, number 16, vanished before he could be taken out, and now 17 is like established in his career being a spy and an assassin without having to complete that ritual. At the beginning of this book, he's doing his like stuff, he's doing his little job, and then 65 pages into this book, the major plot kind of steps in and he's tasked with hunting down and killing 16 to kind of complete that cycle. Most of this stuff is not said in the back of this book, at least. Maybe it's said in the actual copy, because this is, again, an arc from like 3 years ago, almost. But I didn't know any of that stuff going into it. Anyways, this is kind of like James Bond, but if James Bond was annoying and not remotely cool and the action kind of sucked. So, just the worst parts of James Bond. The author did try to include some diversity in his book, but it felt really forced and it was not great. His handler, for example, who's just called Handler, is queer, but also kind of like conniving and you're never sure where his loyalties lie. It felt like really stereotypical, like untrustworthy gay kind of thing, and just like all of the diversity was like that. The women in this are all sexual beings or part of the main character's tragic backstory that is also having to do with sex. And it's kind of like a staple in the spy genre, I guess, but like we're in 2025, we can do better than this. The women can be more than just someone to sleep with and get in the way of your spying and be like, oh, the emotional pressure point. Like, it's just, I don't know. And you try to do something a bit different, I guess. Not even. Like, they're like, oh, the women in this are like kind of resourceful too. Like the two specific women towards the end of the book are like a little bit resourceful and sort of start to like get out of the situation themselves, but he still has to swoop in and save them. It just is not good. It's not good. This is one of those ones where you're like, men should not write women. It's one of those books. I did see someone on Goodreads say that the author is primarily a screenwriter, and it does feel like it's just sort of a fleshed out script. The emotional beats are not very good, the action pace is really odd, the characters were not consistent, and then there was a section in like the latter third of the book, I think, where the plot kept switching directions. It was like, we're doing thing A, just kidding, we're doing thing B, just kidding, we're back to thing A, and I was like, why are we doing this? Why do we keep switching up what's going on? Didn't serve a purpose, and it didn't make much logical sense, unfortunately. This was bad. I didn't enjoy it. I would not recommend it. There has got to be better mindless action books than this one, because this one was kind of bordering on offensive to me at some points. So those are the 6 books that I read on vacation. Most of them were good. The last one was really rough, and I was like scoffing audibly at it the whole time I was reading, much to my boyfriend's chagrin. But the resort we were staying at didn't end up having a like little library, so I couldn't leave any of my books there. But I will be leaving 17 in a little free library the next time I do an unhaul. I might also unhaul next year in Havana. It wasn't bad, but I just don't think it's a book that I will really need to like keep in my collection and look at and be like, ooh, yes, I really enjoyed it. It was fine, but I think I will maybe pass it on so someone else can enjoy it more. But let me know if you've read any of these books or if you're looking forward to any of the new releases that are coming out soon. I'd love to hear from you guys down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time. Now go read a book and go on vacation and read a book on vacation. It's great. I think it's got sand in it still. I'm going to put the meme here. Their first interaction. That's not a word.